this video, I'm going to be looking at Nolan Ryan, and specifically the claim in the movie Fastball in 2016 that Nolan Ryan threw 108 miles an hour in a game in 1974. If you're unfamiliar with the movie, the claim is a Nolan Ryan pitch was measured about 10 feet from the plate at 100.8 miles an hour, and that would extrapolate to about 108 miles an hour based on today's methods of gunning pitchers. This is not an attempt to question the greatness of Nolan Ryan. He's clearly one of the all-time great flame-throwing pitchers, and you can see here the various records that he holds, including the career record for strikeouts. And he was legendarily tough to hit, with 7 career no-hitters and a career hits per 9 of 6.6. Instead, my goal is to delve a little deeper into the methodology of determining Nolan Ryan's 100.8 mile an hour pitch and comparing him with pitchers of today who we know throw very, very hard, like Aroldis, Chapman, and Jordan Hicks. Some of you have been following me for a while may know that I'm somewhat skeptical of the 108 mile an hour claim, and I brought this up with baseball physicist Alan Nathan as well as Tom Tango on Twitter, where all of us were skeptical of it. And recently I had the opportunity to talk to Tom House, who is Nolan Ryan's personal pitching coach, about Nolan Ryan's velocity and whether or not he believed he threw 108 miles an hour.
So about that, obviously every sport, it seems like everything's gotten better. I mean, training's gotten better, people have gotten bigger, people have gotten stronger. Why would that be that Nolan Ryan, like Eraldis Chapman moves really, really well. He's an explosive athlete. He's 6 foot, he's 6'4", strong as an ox. You watch him, he's also got incredible mobility. Is that so I've seen the Fastball movie. I know the measurements that they use. It seemed like a more of an experimental measurement at that point, where they were kind of figuring out where they think the ball got picked up versus being as precise.
You're right. They were extrapolating.
Yeah.
And the pitch that they thought was the hardest one he threw, and that was actually the 113th pitch of a 9-inning game. So you've seen it.
Yeah. And I actually saw the printout where in the first inning they had him at, I couldn't tell if there was a radar error, because to me, if I have a radar gun in the first inning, I have someone at 88, and in the 9th inning, I have him at 100. I'm like, this thing's a piece of junk. I'm throwing it away. But it could be that he also saved something for, like, I know he also saved stuff for the end, and you would know better than I would since you were close.
Okay, you're the first guy that's ever asked this. There's starting pitchers and there's relievers. And they're, basically starters and closers. And then there's starting pitchers who can close. And Nolan was one of those guys. There are a few of them out there today.
Those who played against Nolan seem to universally agree that he was the hardest throwing pitcher they faced. Here's Hank Aaron and Reggie Jackson talking about facing Nolan Ryan.
I've never seen, that's the thing about it, I've never seen anyone throw harder than him. No, never have. I've played baseball for 23 years, and I have never, ever seen anyone throw any harder than he has.
Facing the Nolan Ryan fastball is like trying to drink coffee with a fork.
Ryan's teammate with the Mets, Hall of Famer Tom Seaver, seemed to agree, but he also said that Nolan wasn't way above everybody else. The other thing that seems clear is they really didn't know how hard each other threw. It seems like throwing 100 was a euphemism for just throwing hard.
You talk about you had a Kuzman and a Gentry and a Seaver and a Ryan. You got to understand that we all threw hard. We all threw very hard. I mean, I may have gone out there and thrown the ball 98 miles an hour. Kuzman may have gone out there and thrown the ball 97 miles an hour. Gentry may have gone out there and thrown the ball 98 miles an hour. Nolan went out there, and he threw the ball 100 miles an hour. And we all knew that he threw it harder than really maybe anybody else we had ever seen. But it wasn't that big a difference relative to the rest of us.
And he still didn't have the control that you
No, he didn't have the control. He was such a raw talent.
Before you think Seaver's bragging, there is no doubt he was a hard thrower. You can see here from this home plate view, his fastball and then a curveball and slider against Frank Robinson. Seaver threw really hard. And part of the reason Seaver threw really hard for his era was he hit the weight room. And this was a new development among pitchers. It used to be that pitchers would get strong from working on the farm or something like that. But there was also a competing thought that being strong as a pitcher wasn't good, and it would hurt your performance by making you tight. Seaver talks about it being discouraged in Met camp when he was carrying around 10-pound dumbbells, and he was called Atlas for lifting weights. Now, Nolan Ryan famously took this to the next level. He was really the first pitcher that focused on pure strength and conditioning, and was famous for it. In fact, in his pitching Bible, he gave an entire workout for strength and conditioning. So no doubt he used some modern methods that we even use today for making pitchers strong. Again, the thought used to be that velocity came natural and there was no use in working out because it wasn't going to help your fastball velocity. We know that is false today, but they didn't know that back then. Ryan was definitely on the cutting edge for his era in terms of strength and conditioning and even recovery, as he sometimes used snake oil on his joints to help him recover, something I think we don't use today. I talked with Tom House, Nolan Ryan's personal pitching coach, about Nolan's strength and about the potential for humans to throw hard.
But physically, people don't realize how strong he was, and not just because of the weight room stuff, but the genetics and the fact that, he was a Houston kid that threw bales of hay around and shoveled stalls out and built functional strength, as did the early generation of sports. Most of the athletes came from farming,
Bob Feller.
farming communities or construction workers, where their strength came because of what they were doing in the off season. But with training the way it is today, we're going to optimize. I know for a fact that the human arm can go 118 miles an hour because we've done that. When I was up at USC with the Raw Data Research and Baseball Institute, we had kids throwing off the mound with a 2-ounce at 118 miles an hour.
This is another area where some of my doubt creeps in whether Nolan was the hardest thrower, because you see, Aroldis Chapman has strength and conditioning programs planned out for him by the leading strength and conditioning folks, and he clearly is one strong dude. Not only that, but he also has amazing mobility. So not only is Chapman an excellent athlete, he's 6'4" and has absolutely off the charts flexibility and mobility. So it would seem that with modern training, you would have today's athletes throwing harder, just like in every other sport. Athletes of today are better than athletes of past eras. Athletes are bigger, stronger today, and have a real good idea of what they need to do both in the weight room and in recovery. While I admire the ingenuity and the persistence in trying to determine how fast someone was throwing, I don't really trust old school methods of determining velocity. For example, here's Bob Feller throwing versus a motorcycle going allegedly 86 miles an hour. And here is an early version of a pocket radar. Just kidding. Feller supposedly started his throw before the motorcycle passed him, and then the ball actually beat the motorcycle to the finish, which had some estimating Bob Feller's throw at even up to 120 miles an hour in a dress shirt and shoes. That, my friends, is highly unlikely. Feller later measured himself against a munitions radar gun, or more precisely, a chronograph, which picked up the ball's velocity very close to home plate, and the movie Fastball extrapolated this to be about 107 miles an hour, because this was picking up velocity near home plate instead of out of hand. Again, it's doubtful that this machine was that accurate. That's not saying Feller wasn't the fastest pitcher of his era. He may have been, but I question any non-modern method of measuring velocity. This was done as a promotion as opposed to scientific rigor. Again, this was the best they had, so I'm not questioning the effort. But my eye test, and if you count frames, it does not appear to be 107 miles an hour. And again, both my eye test and counting frames are inaccurate too, so let's just agree to be skeptical of these devices. The modern era of radar guns and measuring velocity of pitchers started in the mid-70s. Basically, a scout saw police gunning cars and said, hey, this could be useful for velocity measurement of pitchers. However, even with this new technology, velo varied greatly depending on what gun you used. As you know, the ball slows down on the way to home plate, and some guns picked up the ball right out of hand, while others picked up the ball closer to home plate. So you had some scouts refer to them as a fast gun and a slow gun. But the cool thing is, now we actually had a device to measure velo. So I went scouring through Nolan Ryan's clips to see how fast he threw on radar guns, since his career definitely overlapped with the advent of radar guns. I found only a few examples. For example, there are a couple of radar gun readings in Nolan Ryan's video Feel the Heat, and I'll take you through them. These readings are later in his career, obviously, but you can see a 94 here, and then later on in that Feel the Heat video, there is a 96 reading. These are readings you would typically see at a college game nowadays, and I'm not comparing Nolan Ryan to a college pitcher because these guns very well might have been slow, and this was later in his career. Here are some more gun readings, and this is from 1979 when Nolan Ryan was 32 years old, so more like prime Nolan Ryan. And you can see they were making note of the fact that Nolan Ryan was clocked at 92 miles an hour, which in today's game is nothing to write home about, but again, the guns could have been slow. And also, compared to other pitchers of his day, that might have been smoking because, as you know, velo has gone up over the years in the major leagues. Now in my research, I tried to find other examples of Nolan Ryan on radar guns, and I found this in Sports Illustrated, which says that Nolan Ryan was clocked at 103 miles an hour in an All-Star game along with Goose Gossage. However, this isn't true. The article makes reference to the 1978 All-Star game, and Nolan Ryan didn't even pitch in the 1978 All-Star game. The source for this 103 mile an hour figure seems to have come from another Sports Illustrated article, this one, the famous April Fool's joke by George Plimpton about a mythical creature who threw 168 miles an hour. And there are quotes about Nolan Ryan and Goose Gossage being the fastest ever on a jugs gun at 103 miles an hour in the 1978 All-Star game. Again, Ryan didn't even pitch in that game, so this is all made up to make the story sound good. Now on to Ryan's 108 mile an hour fastball. Since there's no video of the pitch itself, the best I can do is go through old articles and take a look at what type of gun they used and the circumstances around it. Firstly, this was set up as a promo for the Angels. They were getting less than 10,000 fans a game and it needed something to generate fan interest. So they did a Guess the Velo day for Nolan Ryan, where fans would send in their best guess, and used a newfangled laser measuring device from Rockwell that was never used again after using it twice for Nolan Ryan games. You can read all this in The Science of the Fastball. I believe it wasn't used again because it was highly inaccurate. They claim that the pitch had to be basically in the width of home plate, but more importantly for our purposes, it gave readings that were all over the place. It had Nolan Ryan throwing about 70 miles an hour during warm-ups. During the game, he was throwing 87 in the first inning. And then in the ninth inning, hit 100.8. And allegedly, this laser was measuring the pitch about 10 feet in front of home plate because they didn't want to shine it at Nolan Ryan because they didn't want to cause him to go blind, which would have been really bad for the promotion. Now I say about 10 feet because they literally did not know how far in front they were aiming the laser because this wasn't a scientific test. This was a promotion by the Angels. Again, to me, if I'm sitting behind home plate and judging my pitchers and I get 87.6 in the first inning and 100.8 in the ninth inning after a 94 and a 91 during the game and other innings, I think my gun's broken. I don't think that reading would be legit, but that's just me. There also was undoubtedly extra pressure on the scientists doing this measurement because they knew Bob Feller claimed to throw 98.6, and for this promotion to be successful and for people to leave the stadium happy, Nolan Ryan better throw 100 miles an hour. Here's some video of Nolan Ryan talking about the pitch, and you can see he said they had one at 74 miles an hour, then 84, and then in warm-ups he threw 93. So the readings were kind of all over the place, and he was stressed out thinking this whole thing was going to be a mess because everyone thought he threw over 100 miles an hour, and that gun better say that he did. Here's a look at how complicated that machine looked, and no doubt that they were tinkering with the machine to get proper readings. And again, here is a look at all the velo readings during the game, and you can see they were kind of all over the place, which makes me doubt the veracity of the machine itself. And the fact that Ryan threw his fastest in the 9th inning seems really odd, especially since he threw over 150 pitches that game. However, to counter that, Michael Fisher from Codify shows here Nolan Ryan actually probably did save something for the end of the game, because his OPS against was actually better the 4th time through the lineup than it was the 1st time through the lineup. And based on my conversations with Tom House, Nolan Ryan absolutely did save something for the end of the game and wanted to act as his own closer. So while I'm skeptical that he threw his hardest in the 9th inning, it doesn't mean he didn't. Because I have some doubts about the gun they used to determine Nolan Ryan's 108-mile-an-hour pitch, I decided that I would do my own investigation. So I went back looking for games around that time frame in 1974 towards the end of the season in the 9th inning when he was supposedly throwing his hardest. And luckily I found this one in August of 1974 where he was going for a no-hitter and really rared back in the 9th inning to let one go. And as you can see from this video, there is no doubt that Nolan Ryan absolutely threw flames. The ball absolutely explodes out of his hand, and no doubt that this pitch was extremely fast. Now again, I don't trust my eyes in determining velocity. I've seen too many times where I think a pitcher's throwing harder than they are, and you get a gun and they're not throwing that hard. But if you told me that pitch was over 100 miles an hour, maybe even well over 100 miles an hour, I'm not going to argue with you. In fact, I'm going to play you Harry Carey's call on this pitch, and he was pretty impressed by it as well.
Nolan Ryan has a no-hitter in the bottom of the 9th, leading on Frank Robinson's homer, 1-0. Wow, is he throwing hard. Holy cow, what smoke.
This guy never lets up.
Now, because that pitch wasn't gunned, I figured I'd try to compare it against pitches that were gunned from the fastest throwers of today. So here is Jordan Hicks with his 105-mile-an-hour absolute missile. You can see, I mean, at least to my eyes, that ball looks kind of like that Nolan Ryan pitch. They both take off arm side and are absolutely gas. Next, we'll take a look at some of Aroldis Chapman's fastest pitches. That is 105 miles an hour. You can see that gets on you rather quickly. And this is Eraldis in his absolute prime, obviously, where he was the Cuban Missile and undoubtedly threw as hard as anybody in the history of baseball. And we'll go through a couple more Aroldis Chapman 105-mile-an-hour pitches because it's fun. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare it side by side with the Nolan Ryan pitch that I first showed you, just to see if it was possible that Nolan Ryan's pitch was well over 100 miles an hour, as we know these pitches are. Because obviously radar gun technology is way better today. So here we go. Looking at these, I'll even take it in slow motion. I timed up the release exactly to a line. Again, I can't tell which of these pitches is faster. They look fairly similar. Obviously, I don't know the extension of each pitcher, so that's going to have something to do with it to match it up 100%. And again, this method is not infallible. It's very, very hard to match up video exactly. But if you told me that those pitches were identical in speed, I would probably say, I mean, you got a point. They kind of do look identical in speed. Now we'll take you through Aroldis Chapman's fastball. Again, I don't see a huge difference in velo between these pitches. So even though I'm very, very skeptical of radar gun technology back then, I can affirmatively say that Nolan Ryan did not throw well over 100 miles an hour. So I went through all this work to try to disprove the 108-mile-an-hour fastball, and honestly, I don't think I can affirmatively say one way or another. While I'm still skeptical of it, he threw really, really hard, no doubt. So if this was an episode of Pitching Ninja Mythbusters, I would say this Pitching Ninja myth was not busted despite my best attempt. So you can see why Nolan Ryan was the most feared pitcher of his era. In fact, Norm Cash here took a table leg up against him while Nolan Ryan was going for a no-hitter. You can see umpire Ron Luciano crack up laughing, but that's how hopeless hitters felt against Nolan back in his heyday. And not only did he throw flames, but he had a ridiculous hook, as you see here against Mike Schmidt. Absolutely unfair. And then here in the 1969 World Series, just absolute knee buckler. And not only that, but Nolan Ryan had a absolutely ridiculous changeup too. You can see why he amassed such ridiculous strikeout totals. I mean, that is absolutely not fair, as he pronated through the pitch and it just disappeared. So you imagine that on top of a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, well, you're probably going to strike out.
Strike 3!